For hundreds of years, the humans were only a story, just a whisper in the vast expanse of space. Every colony, every civilization beyond the stars had heard tales of them, but no one had ever seen them. They were thought to be like legends, creatures so strange and unpredictable that even speaking their name felt risky. Some said they were warriors capable of incredible feats. Others whispered that they were reckless, emotional, and dangerous. But everyone agreed on one thing: they had vanished, disappeared from history, gone as if they had never existed at all. Most of the galaxy didn't care much about them, treating the old stories like myths meant to entertain children on long, dark nights aboard distant space stations. Life continued without humans, as it always did. Planets were governed, wars were fought, trade routes were established, and civilizations rose and fell. The humans, or at least what they had once been, were nothing but a memory, a puzzle that no one could solve. Ancient texts described them as pioneers of the stars, the first to leave their home world, the first to push past the boundaries of their own galaxy. They built machines, ships, and weapons that seemed almost impossible to understand, but then suddenly they were gone. Some said they destroyed themselves in wars nobody wanted to remember. Some thought they left voluntarily, retreating to the unknown corners of the universe. And so the stories faded into legends, stories told to children to keep them curious and cautious. Yet somewhere deep in the minds of every scholar there was a faint question. If they were gone, where had they really gone? The first sign that humans might not be gone came quietly, in a small mining station at the edge of a remote asteroid belt, far beyond the borders of any major empire. Strange energy readings began appearing on the sensors. The miners, used to all sorts of anomalies in deep space, didn't think much of it at first. Pulses of energy, irregular and raw, flickered across their monitors. At first, they assumed it was a technical glitch, something in the old system of the station rebelling against the cold vacuum of space. But then the readings grew stronger, far too strong to be random. The sensors recorded a pattern that nobody had seen in centuries. It was almost familiar, something buried in the histories of every galactic historian: nuclear fission. Primitive, raw, yet powerful, energy signatures that no current civilization used anymore. They were old, very old, and yet they were alive. Nobody aboard the station believed it at first. Maybe it was some leftover human technology drifting across the belt? That made sense at first, but as hours passed, something else happened. A voice cut through the communications channel. It was rough, commanding, and real. It spoke a language thought extinct for centuries. The words were crude, blunt, and unmistakably human. The miners froze. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a prank or a technical error. But the voice came again, clearer this time. No hesitation, no distortion. Just raw human speech echoing through a station that had long forgotten humans could even speak. And then the ships appeared. They were nothing like the myths had described. These were not simple, weak crafts designed to flee danger. They were massive, angular, and armored in ways that even the most advanced engineers could not immediately understand. Their surfaces reflected the faint light of distant stars in a dull gray, as though they had been forged from the darkness itself. And the word painted boldly on their sides made every heart stop: Earth. That one word, simple yet terrifying, told everyone exactly who they were dealing with. These were not remnants, not relics. These were humans, real humans, alive and present in a place no one ever thought they would be. Panic rippled through the miners. They sent out warnings, scrambled transmissions, and tried to contact the nearest council fleets, but communications failed. The humans moved with precision, avoiding sensors, slipping through patrol lines that had not even known they were being watched. Every second that passed made the situation feel stranger and more impossible. Every historian, every scholar who had studied human myths had to face the shocking truth. The humans weren't just a story. They had never truly disappeared. They had been waiting, hiding, preparing, far beyond the edge of known space, silent for centuries while the galaxy moved on without them. In the council chambers of the farthest star systems, advisors debated and argued. Some insisted the reports were wrong, that no species could survive for so long without leaving a trace. Some feared it was an elaborate trap, a weapon from another long-forgotten war. And yet the evidence was growing impossible to ignore. Transmission after transmission, sighting after sighting, told the same story. Humans were real. They were armed, organized, and moving with intention. The question shifted from if to why. Why now? Why had they stayed silent for so long? And what would happen when they finally showed themselves fully? Meanwhile, the miners watched in disbelief as the human ships disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. There was no warning, no communication, no message left behind. Only the faint trace of their engines and the overwhelming sense that something had changed forever. Life on the station continued in a shaky, uncertain rhythm. Every eye turned skyward, every ear straining for the faintest sign of the humans' return. And deep down, every person aboard the station realized something simple, terrifying, and exhilarating at once. The humans were coming back. The stories they had dismissed as myths were not just true. They were a warning. No one knew what would come next. Some hoped the humans had learned from their past, that they might be explorers, observers, or cautious travelers. Others feared they would arrive with the fury that legends had always whispered about. One thing was certain. The galaxy had underestimated them for too long. The forgotten species, the ones that had once shaped the very history of the stars, had chosen this moment to return. And when they did, everyone would know the truth that could never be ignored again. Humans were not extinct, not lost, and not to be underestimated. They were real. They were powerful. And their story was just beginning again. As night fell on the mining station, the workers gathered quietly, speaking in hushed tones. They speculated endlessly, trying to fill the hours with stories and explanations. But even as they did, a small voice within them, a voice they didn't fully understand, reminded them of something they had always been taught as children. Humans were unpredictable. They were brave. They were reckless. And most importantly, they were capable of doing what no one else in the galaxy could imagine. The stars seemed suddenly smaller, the void more intimidating, and the galaxy itself quieter, as if holding its breath. And somewhere, far beyond the asteroid belt, the humans were already moving. Ships built for war and exploration glided silently across the darkness, engines humming with energy that no sensor could fully capture. Crews worked with discipline that seemed almost unnatural, preparing for a mission that had been planned for centuries. Every decision, every movement, every calculation was deliberate. They had waited long enough. Now it was time to remind the galaxy that legends were not always stories, and sometimes the impossible was very real. The miners watched the skies, their minds struggling to grasp what they had seen. Every tale they had heard about humans, every whisper, every warning, every story told in classrooms and archives, suddenly seemed vivid and real. The myths were alive. They had names, faces, and ships, and they were returning with purpose. The galaxy would never be the same again, and the first chapter of this story was only just unfolding. The first human ships were a shadow on the edge of the sensors, almost too fast to track. They moved with quiet confidence, gliding past asteroid clusters and drifting debris without leaving a trace of their path. For the miners and station crews watching from the outskirts of known space, it felt unreal, like a dream. They had spent their entire lives hearing stories, reading old reports, and studying faded maps of where humans were said to have once been. And now here they were, real, present, and moving with intent. At first, everyone thought it might be a coincidence. Maybe these were rogue ships, scavengers using old human designs to scare others or make a profit. But the details quickly destroyed that assumption. The ships weren't random. They weren't scattered like bandits or pirates. They moved with formation, precision, and purpose. Every vessel seemed to know exactly where the others were, never colliding, never pausing, always advancing. It was as if they were part of a single mind, a network of thought and action perfectly synchronized. And the signals they left behind confirmed it. They were alive and they were communicating. The miners, curious and terrified, tried to reach out. Their attempts at communication were simple at first. A few standard phrases, polite warnings, and questions. The humans responded, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no pleasantries, no diplomatic niceties, no explanations. Just direct statements delivered in a voice that carried authority without aggression. The words were clear, concise, and chilling in their simplicity. "This is Terran Command," the message said, echoing across the channels like a hammer strike. "You are in restricted space. Leave immediately or face consequences." The miners stared at their monitors. Terran Command. The words alone carried weight, though they had no idea what those words truly meant. Terran. Another name for humans, yes, but it sounded more official, more commanding. And the tone, calm yet unmistakably warning, was unlike anything they had ever heard. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no fear. It was a statement of fact. Humans existed. Humans were back. And humans were not here to negotiate. The news spread quickly, faster than anyone could have imagined. Sensors in nearby colonies began picking up similar readings. More ships appeared, moving through uncharted sectors of space. The reports were identical. Powerful vessels, unfamiliar but clearly human in design, moving in formation, armed and prepared. Scholars who had spent decades studying myths and legends of humanity were forced to accept reality. Humans had not disappeared. They had only been silent, hiding, preparing for this very moment. Speculation ran wild. Some believed the humans had been living beyond known space, studying other civilizations, gathering knowledge and growing stronger. Others thought they had been fighting some hidden war of their own, one that had kept them away from the rest of the galaxy for centuries. Everyone agreed on one thing. This was not the humans of stories told to children. This was something else entirely. They were no longer just legends, they were real and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The first real contact came unexpectedly. A scout ship from a nearby colony attempted to approach one of the human vessels, hoping to study it, record it, or communicate. But as it drew closer, the humans acted. Without warning, a small weapon system activated, sending a warning pulse that disabled the scout ship's engines. No damage, no casualties, just a clear, undeniable message: you are not welcome. The scout crew was shaken, their hands trembling as they watched the humans move with speed and efficiency. Every maneuver seemed deliberate, every action intentional. The humans were watching, calculating, and waiting. It became clear that the humans were not here to explore, and they were not here to negotiate. They were here to announce themselves, to make the galaxy remember that they had existed and that they had returned. The legends had underestimated them, and the stories had not done justice to the truth. Humans were not just capable of surviving. They had adapted, evolved, and grown stronger than anyone had imagined. Every observation reinforced the same lesson. Never assume you understand a human. Meanwhile, the council that governed interstellar relations convened urgently. Advisors, scientists, military commanders, and historians gathered to discuss the impossible reality. They debated endlessly, questioning the reports, analyzing sensor data, and reviewing historical records. Every piece of evidence confirmed the same shocking fact: humans were real, they were armed, and they were moving with purpose. The council realized that their entire understanding of galactic history had been incomplete. Humans had been the first pioneers of the stars, the first to build interstellar travel and weapons far beyond anything currently in use. Their disappearance had created a gap in history that no one had been able to explain. Now, that gap was being filled, and it was terrifying in its clarity. In the mining station at the edge of known space, the miners and technicians were glued to their screens. Every transmission, every flicker of light from the human ships carried a weight that was almost unbearable. They whispered to each other, speculating about what humans wanted, what they were capable of, and why they had waited so long. Some feared an invasion, some hoped for a peaceful arrival. But deep down, even the most optimistic among them knew that humans were unpredictable. They were brave, reckless, and entirely their own species. The universe had forgotten them, but the humans had not forgotten the universe. The human ships moved silently, avoiding major colonies, slipping past patrols, and observing without interference. They were like shadows in the void, always present but never fully revealed. It was clear that they had a strategy, one that had been developed over decades or perhaps centuries. Every ship, every crew member, every weapon system was part of a larger plan that no one could yet understand. And yet, the presence of these ships sent a message louder than any weapon could. Humanity had returned, and it was ready to be noticed. As the days passed, more sightings occurred. Reports came from distant sectors, some from explorers who had traveled far beyond the maps, others from patrols guarding trade routes. Each sighting told the same story. Human ships moved with precision, efficiency, and intent. There was no randomness, no chaos, and no hesitation. They were alive, alert, and prepared. The galaxy began to understand the truth that had been hidden for centuries. Humans were not just survivors. They were a force that could not be ignored. The reactions were as varied as the galaxy itself. Some civilizations panicked, immediately bolstering their defenses and calling for emergency meetings. Others were fascinated, trying to record and study the humans, hoping to learn from them or understand their sudden reappearance. And a few, the bravest or perhaps the most foolish, attempted to communicate, sending messages filled with questions, warnings, and cautious curiosity. Every attempt was met with the same calm, direct response. Humans were watching, humans were aware, and humans were in control. Even the historians, those who had spent their lives studying the myths of humanity, were forced to reconsider everything they knew. The old records had been incomplete, the stories exaggerated, and the lessons forgotten. Humans had built civilizations that could reach the stars, had mastered technology beyond understanding, and had somehow survived their own disappearance. Now, after centuries of silence, they were back, reminding the galaxy that legends could be real, and that the stories of the past could never be ignored again. At the mining station, the workers gathered each night to watch the distant lights of the human fleet. They speculated endlessly, trying to understand the impossible, and yet as they watched, they realized that the humans were not trying to hide their presence. They were sending a message, a warning, and perhaps an invitation to remember what the universe had once known. The stars seemed smaller, the void quieter, and the galaxy itself felt different, as if holding its breath in anticipation. And somewhere far beyond the asteroid belts, the humans moved with calm precision. Their ships glided silently across the darkness, engines humming with a power that sensors could barely measure. Crews worked with focus, preparing for a future that had been planned for generations. Every movement, every calculation, every choice was deliberate. They had waited long enough. Now the galaxy would see them again. The legends were not lies. The stories were not mistakes. Humans were real. Humans were back, and the universe would never forget them. By the time the first alarm signals from council fleets reached the edge of human-controlled space, it was already too late to ignore the truth. Humans had arrived. The myths had become reality. The stories told for centuries were unfolding before every eye, every sensor, every mind. And as the galaxy collectively realized the magnitude of what was happening, one undeniable thought spread like wildfire. The humans were no longer hidden. They were here. They were real. And the next chapter of history was beginning. The humans had been watched for days now. Every scanner, every observer, every historian across the galaxy tried to understand them, to see patterns, to predict their next move. But humans were nothing like anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They were organized, disciplined, and calm. Yet there was an unmistakable undercurrent of unpredictability that no machine, no computer, no sensor could calculate. Every action seemed deliberate, but the overall purpose remained unclear. It was as if they were playing a game the rest of the universe didn't know the rules to. The first fleet to truly meet the humans was not prepared for what they would face. The Galactic Council had sent what they considered a small but capable reconnaissance force. Their goal was simple: approach, observe, and if necessary, communicate. The commanders of these ships were experienced, trained for decades in diplomacy, negotiation, and, if needed, warfare. They were confident. Too confident. They assumed humans were extinct or too weak to pose any real threat. Legends were just stories, after all. But as their fleet moved closer to the human ships, that confidence vanished. The humans didn't scatter. They didn't retreat. Instead, they held formation, moving in unison with precision that seemed almost unnatural. The council ships scanned every detail: hull integrity, weapon systems, propulsion, crew numbers. Everything suggested that these humans were not only alive, but they had technologies and skills long thought lost to history. The readings shocked every officer and scientist on board. Some systems couldn't even be explained. It was as if humans had combined the past with the present, taking what the galaxy had forgotten and improving it far beyond anyone's expectations. Then came the first communication. It was short, direct, and impossible to misinterpret. "This is Terran Command. You are in restricted space. Leave immediately or face consequences." There was no hesitation in the voice, no pleading, no explanation. Just the facts. The council fleet was stunned. No one had ever spoken like that. Most had never imagined a species capable of commanding authority with such calm confidence. The historians muttered among themselves. The engineers whispered to each other. Even the soldiers, trained to respond in moments of crisis, froze. This was different. This was not just a species returning from the past. This was a species that had grown stronger in ways nobody could measure. Attempts at further communication failed. The humans listened, they observed, but they didn't respond to questions or attempts to explain. Instead, they moved silently and purposefully, positioning their ships in patterns that the Council could not understand. It was clear they were aware of every move, every strategy, every calculation the other side tried to make, and yet they did not attack. Not yet. The tension in space was unbearable. Every officer aboard the Council ships knew that any sudden action could trigger a disaster. The humans had made it clear they were not here to negotiate, and yet they had not initiated aggression. It was a warning, a test, a message that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Humans were unpredictable. They were disciplined, yet their discipline was not bound by fear or convention. They acted according to their own rules, and those rules were unknowable to outsiders. Meanwhile, on distant colonies, the news spread like wildfire. Messages from the edge of human territory arrived in fragments, incomplete and terrifyingly clear. Reports spoke of ships moving faster than expected, weapon systems beyond comprehension, and crews acting with a precision that made the most advanced commanders question their training. The galaxy realized something simple and terrifying at once. Humans had returned not as survivors but as masters of their own fate. They had waited, studied, and prepared, and now they were demonstrating what the legends had only hinted at. The first clash was not planned. It was accidental, the result of misunderstanding, overconfidence, and fear. A patrol vessel from the Council fleet, unfamiliar with the humans' deliberate caution, approached too closely, scanning weapon systems with what they thought was harmless curiosity. The humans observed, calculated, and responded. A kinetic pulse, faster than anything known, disabled the patrol vessel's engines without harming the crew. Systems shut down, lights flickered, and alarms rang across the Council fleet. There was no physical damage, no casualties, just a clear, undeniable message. Humans were capable of precision action that no one could ignore. Panic spread quickly among the Council fleet. Every officer understood the implications immediately. If humans were willing to act with such precision without hesitation, what would happen if they decided to strike? What other systems, what other fleets, what other planets were in their sights? The historians tried to calm the commanders with the weight of past records, but even the oldest documents offered no answers. Humans had been underestimated, they had been forgotten, and now the galaxy was paying the price of that underestimation. The Council tried to respond, sending more ships, more communications, more warnings, but the humans were always a step ahead, not because they were faster or stronger or more numerous, but because they understood strategy in a way no one else did. Their movements were deliberate, efficient, and frighteningly intelligent. They did not panic. They did not hesitate. They did not retreat. They acted as if centuries of preparation had led them to this exact moment, and everything else was simply part of the background. On the Council's main observation station, analysts watched every feed, every signal, every ship movement. They recorded patterns, attempted predictions, and tried to make sense of what they were seeing. But every calculation failed. Humans were not predictable. Humans were not to be measured by conventional means. They were unique, unparalleled, and operating according to principles that no one else could understand. The galaxy had thought they were extinct. They were not, and now no one could pretend otherwise. Meanwhile, the human ships did something unexpected. They did not advance further into Council space, nor did they retreat. Instead, they held position, a silent but overwhelming statement of power. It was a demonstration, a warning, and a message all at once. The humans wanted the galaxy to know that they were back, not as legends, not as stories whispered across generations. They were back as living, breathing, armed, and aware beings, and they would no longer be ignored. The tension in the void grew with every passing hour. Every Council officer, historian, and soldier understood one undeniable fact. Humans were not like anyone else. They were not motivated by fear, by tradition, or by simple survival. Their motivations were unknown, their abilities unmatched, and their presence undeniable. Every calculation, every prediction, every plan the Council had made was now obsolete. They had not accounted for humans. They had not considered that the legends could be real, and somewhere within the human fleet the crews worked silently. They monitored every transmission, every sensor, every movement. Orders were given, actions executed, all with calm precision. There was no chaos, no panic, no doubt. Everything was deliberate. Everything was planned. The humans had returned not by accident, not by chance, but by design. They had waited for the right moment, and now that moment had come. On distant planets, people watched the skies in awe and fear. Stories that had seemed like fairy tales were now real. Ships that had existed only in textbooks and myths were moving across the void. And the galaxy collectively realized the truth. Humans had been underestimated. They had been forgotten. They had returned. And no one knew what they were capable of. As night fell on one of the outer colonies, a small group of civilians gathered around a screen showing the live feed from a human vessel. Children whispered, adults argued, but everyone understood the same thing. This was history unfolding in real time. The humans were back, and they were unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. There was excitement, yes, but also fear, awe, and respect. The galaxy was no longer the same. By the time the first warning signals were sent to the Council fleets, it was clear that the humans were more than a returning species. They were a force of nature, disciplined, prepared, and unpredictable. Every fleet, every commander, every historian understood the same frightening fact. Humans were here, and the galaxy would never be able to ignore them again. The first meeting between humans and Council fleets had changed everything. It was not a battle, not yet, but it was a demonstration of power and awareness unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. The humans had returned, not as myths, not as relics, but as real beings, fully capable of shaping the course of history. And as every eye watched the distant human ships, one thought settled across every mind. The legends had been true. Humans were real. Humans were here. And the galaxy was only beginning to understand the consequences. The tension in space had been building for days. Every observer, every scanner, and every historian knew the humans were not to be underestimated. The Galactic Council had grown nervous, and the fleets dispatched to monitor the situation were on high alert. Yet despite all their preparation, they could not have predicted what would happen next. The humans had remained patient, holding their formation, observing and sending messages that were impossible to misinterpret. They had given warnings, shown their capabilities, and displayed precision unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. But the patience of one side was about to meet the panic of the other. It started with a miscalculation. A Council fleet, overconfident in its technology and numbers, attempted to maneuver closer to a human ship. They wanted to demonstrate power, to assert control, and perhaps to intimidate. They did not consider that humans had been waiting for this moment for centuries. They did not consider that humans understood strategy in ways no other species could. The humans reacted instantly. It was not reckless or emotional. It was precise, calculated, and devastating. A single strike disabled the fleet's engines with pinpoint accuracy, leaving them stranded in the void. No lives were lost at first, but the message was clear. Humans did not negotiate weakness, and they did not forgive arrogance. The Council officers watching from observation stations paled at what they saw. The humans were not only capable, they were far beyond any expectations. The Council attempted to respond, sending additional fleets to surround the human vessels. They thought sheer numbers would intimidate them, or at least contain them. But humans moved like a single organism. Ships slipped between patrol lines, disappeared behind asteroid belts, and reappeared where no one expected. They attacked only when necessary, choosing their moments with surgical precision. The first real clash occurred not in anger, but as a defensive measure. One of the Council's larger ships fired a warning shot, believing the humans would retreat. They did not. Instead, the humans responded. Within minutes, entire sections of the Council fleet were torn apart by kinetic projectiles that moved faster than anyone had believed possible. Shields collapsed under the force, and engines failed in ways no engineer could explain. It was not chaos. It was efficiency. Humans were methodical, controlled, and terrifyingly effective. The aftermath left the Council fleet in shock. Hundreds of crew members watched as their ships drifted silently, disabled and powerless. The humans did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They simply held their positions calm and disciplined, as if the destruction around them was merely a demonstration of principle. Every observer understood the same truth. Humans had returned not for diplomacy, not for negotiation. They had returned to assert their presence, and they would do so on their own terms. Reports of the clash spread quickly. Colonies, stations, and fleets across the galaxy were stunned. Humans had always been part of history, part of myths and legends, but now they were a force the galaxy could not ignore. Their technology was advanced, yes, but it was their strategy and discipline that terrified observers. No other species acted with such control, such precision, and such understanding of the consequences of every action. Back on the human ships, crews worked quietly. There was no celebration, no shouting, no visible emotion. Every member knew their role, understood the plan, and executed it without hesitation. Orders were given in calm tones, calculations were precise, and every maneuver had purpose. They had waited for this moment for centuries, and now that it had arrived, they would not falter. The Council attempted to negotiate again, sending messages filled with warnings and threats. But the humans did not respond in the way anyone expected. They did not plead, argue, or negotiate. They merely acted. Every movement, every strike, every positioning of their ship sent a single message. Underestimate humans at your own peril. The Council fleets could only watch, powerless, as the humans demonstrated their superiority in ways no one had believed possible. On distant colonies, civilians watched the reports with a mixture of awe and fear. Children who had grown up hearing stories of humans whispered excitedly, imagining what it must be like to see them in person. Adults debated, trying to understand the implications of what they were witnessing. Entire cities paused, staring at the skies, realizing that legends had returned as a terrifying, undeniable reality. Humans were alive, and they were stronger than anyone had imagined. The Council was forced to reconsider everything. Fleet formations, battle strategies, and diplomatic approaches were no longer relevant. The humans had rewritten the rules simply by existing. Their discipline, intelligence, and power were beyond any prediction, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. Advisors and commanders debated late into the night, trying to understand what they had underestimated for so long. Every conclusion led to the same result. Humans could not be ignored, could not be defeated with conventional tactics, and could not be predicted with current knowledge. Even among the Council fleets, there was a growing sense of respect. Humans were not reckless, despite the stories. They were not merely warriors or survivors. They were calculated, intelligent, and capable of seeing outcomes far beyond what anyone else could comprehend. The destruction they had caused was not random. It was precise, necessary, and effective. The galaxy had expected legends, myths, perhaps even foolish stories. What they had received was reality, and it was overwhelming. As the humans moved through the void, their strategy became clear. They were not interested in conquest. They were not seeking revenge. They were demonstrating capability, presence, and readiness. Every fleet movement, and every strike was calculated to show that humans were no longer a forgotten species. They were a force to be reckoned with, disciplined beyond imagination and impossible to ignore. The Council fleets attempted a counterattack, hoping to regain control. But humans anticipated every maneuver. Ships moved faster, dodged attacks with ease, and responded with precision that no one could match. Each strike was measured, each movement deliberate. The Council fleets were forced into defensive positions, retreating as humans demonstrated their dominance in both strategy and firepower. Colonies and observation posts across the galaxy were filled with tension. Reports streamed in continuously, detailing the humans' precision, efficiency, and discipline. No one could understand their full capabilities. No one could predict their next moves. And yet one thing became clear. Humans were back to remind the galaxy of their presence, and they would not be ignored. Back on the human ships, crews maintained their calm efficiency. There was no excitement, no joy, no celebration. Every action was deliberate. Every decision was calculated. They moved not as individuals but as one unified force, executing centuries of preparation in precise, controlled measures. The galaxy had been warned. Humans had returned, and they were not here to be underestimated. By the end of the conflict, the Council fleets had suffered significant losses. Ships were disabled, fleets scattered, and the entire Council realized that they had misjudged humans for centuries. They had treated legends as myths and myths as fiction. Now reality had shattered all assumptions. Humans were alive, disciplined, and terrifyingly capable. The galaxy would never forget the lessons of this encounter. As silence fell over the battlefield, both literally and figuratively, humans held their positions. No one aboard their ship spoke unnecessarily. Orders had been given, objectives met, and a clear statement had been made. Humans were back, and they were fully aware of their capabilities and presence. Every observer, every survivor, every historian understood the same thing. Humans had returned not to blend in, not to negotiate, but to assert themselves in a universe that had forgotten them. The first clash had ended, but the tension remained. The Council fleets had learned the hard way that humans were unlike any other species. They were not bound by fear, tradition, or convention. They were calculated, disciplined, and deadly in ways that no one had anticipated. The galaxy understood a fundamental truth that would not be forgotten. Humans had returned, and their presence would change everything. In the aftermath, observers across the galaxy recorded the events meticulously. Every movement, every strike, every communication was analyzed. Scholars and historians realized that the myths had been understatements. Humans had not only survived but had grown stronger, more capable and more disciplined than any account could ever describe. The galaxy had assumed humans were gone. They were not. And now every civilization, every fleet, and every colony would have to consider their presence carefully. Even in silence, humans sent a message. They were present, they were powerful, and they would not be underestimated again. The legend had returned, and the reality was far more formidable than anyone could have imagined. The first clash was over, but it was only the beginning. Humans had made their presence known, and the galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. The galaxy was in shock. The first clash with humans had left fleets scattered, systems damaged, and confidence shaken. Historians and strategists struggled to process the reality that humans were not only alive, but stronger and more disciplined than any account had ever suggested. Across every corner of the stars, fleets convened, colonies debated, and advisors scrambled to understand what had just happened. Yet no one could fully comprehend it. Humans had returned, and their capabilities were unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Amid the chaos, a small council of historians and linguists began to piece together clues from intercepted transmissions and sensor data. It was painstaking work. Ancient archives were dusted off, long-forgotten records cross-checked, and fragmented reports studied for hidden meaning. Every detail mattered, from the insignia on the ships to the cadence of their orders. Slowly, an understanding began to emerge. Humans had not vanished by accident. They had not been defeated or destroyed. They had simply withdrawn. The reason for their disappearance was as fascinating as it was terrifying. Centuries ago, humans had reached the pinnacle of space travel. They had built ships capable of speeds that no other species could match, developed weapons that could rival entire fleets, and expanded their influence to distant star systems. Yet internal conflict had fractured their civilization. Civil wars, political disputes, and ideological clashes had forced them into a prolonged retreat. They had pulled back into the outer reaches of uncharted space, disappearing from the maps and stories of other civilizations. While the galaxy moved on, humans had quietly rebuilt, learned, adapted, and grown stronger in isolation. When this truth was confirmed, it sent ripples through every council chamber, every fleet, and every academic institution. Humans had not merely survived, they had evolved. They had mastered technologies that the galaxy had long forgotten, combined with strategic thinking honed over generations of planning and discipline. What the legends had hinted at was not exaggeration, it was understatement. Humans had not been reckless or careless. They had been preparing. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the humans continued their controlled advance. They did not attack colonies or trade routes unnecessarily. They moved with purpose, precise and deliberate, always aware of the consequences of each action. Every fleet movement, every deployment of weapons, and every tactical maneuver was executed with perfection. Observers could not understand it fully. It was as if humans could predict the outcome of events before they even unfolded. Colonial stations and fleets began sending emissaries and messages, attempting to communicate with humans. Some were cautious, sending peaceful gestures, hoping to understand intent. Others were desperate, sending warnings or threats to protect their worlds. But humans responded minimally, always in a measured, calm tone. Their presence alone was communication enough. Every action, every strike, and every maneuver sent a message louder than words. Humans were not extinct, they were powerful, and they were not to be underestimated. The revelations about their history only added to the tension. Humans had been the first to leave their home planet and had laid the foundations of interstellar travel and communication. They had interacted with civilizations that no longer existed, fought wars that had shaped sectors now dominated by others, and created technologies that had been lost to time. Their withdrawal was strategic, a retreat to preserve their people, their knowledge, and their capabilities. The galaxy had assumed myths, stories told to children, were exaggerations. Now, the myths were real, and reality was far more formidable than anyone could have imagined. As humans moved, other species began to react. Some prepared defensive fleets attempting to fortify borders and strengthen positions. Others studied humans, hoping to learn from their tactics or predict their moves. A few civilizations, more cautious or more fearful, withdrew from contested sectors entirely. But no one dared act recklessly. Humans had shown without hesitation that they were capable of precision strikes that could cripple fleets and destroy advanced technology with minimal effort. Every miscalculation now carried tremendous risk. On a remote observation station, scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to understand the human ships. Sensors could measure power, speed, and firepower, but much of what they observed defied explanation. Humans had integrated old technologies with new innovations in ways that created efficiency, durability, and adaptability beyond comprehension. Their ships could maneuver through asteroid belts, evade attacks, and deploy weapons with precision that seemed almost supernatural. It was not magic, nor technology alone. It was human ingenuity, discipline, and strategy combined. As more information surfaced, it became clear that the humans had not returned merely to reclaim territory. They were asserting presence, reminding the galaxy of their existence, and sending a warning to all civilizations. Underestimate humanity at your own peril. Every fleet and colony that had previously dismissed stories of humans as myths now faced an undeniable reality. Legends had walked among the stars once, and now they had returned, fully capable of shaping the future. For the humans themselves, the return was a quiet, controlled process. There was no celebration, no hubris, no unnecessary aggression. Every crew member understood the importance of discipline, precision, and awareness. Orders were executed with exactness, strategy was applied with thoughtfulness, and every action reinforced the presence of humans as a formidable force. The galaxy observed in awe, realizing that humans were not only back, they were better, smarter, and stronger than ever before. The council fleets tried to establish contact, sending representatives to propose negotiations or peaceful coexistence. Humans listened, but their responses were calm, measured, and deliberate. There was no need to argue. There was no need to justify actions. The humans had returned, and their actions spoke for themselves. Every movement communicated a clear message. They were aware, they were capable, and they were prepared. Civilians on distant colonies watched with a mixture of fear and wonder. Children whispered to each other, imagining what it must be like to see a human ship glide silently across the stars. Adults debated what it meant for trade, defense, and survival. Historians recorded every detail, realizing that myths and stories had understated the truth. Humans had not vanished. They had evolved, prepared, and returned with capabilities the galaxy could barely comprehend. As time passed, more human fleets were observed moving through the void. They did not attack unnecessarily. They did not destroy colonies or systems without reason. Their purpose was clear: to demonstrate presence, capability, and control. They were teaching the galaxy a lesson, showing that humans were alive, organized, and disciplined. Any aggression against them would be met with precision and efficiency. The legend of humans had been true all along, and the reality was far more formidable than anyone could have imagined. The revelations about their history had profound effects. Civilizations that had once dismissed stories of humans scrambled to adjust strategies, fortify fleets, and rethink alliances. Every military leader, scientist, and diplomat had to confront a new reality. Humans were not merely survivors. They were a species that had mastered strategy, technology, and discipline to an extraordinary degree. Their return challenged every assumption the galaxy had made about history, power, and survival. Amid the growing tension, humans maintained calm control. There was no chaos aboard their ships, no frantic movements, no unnecessary conflict. Every decision was deliberate, every action calculated. Observers noted that humans were not only formidable, they were intelligent, adaptive, and capable of anticipating outcomes with uncanny accuracy. The galaxy watched in awe, realizing that the legends they had laughed at for centuries were not just true, they were warnings. As more fleets observed the humans, it became evident that their return was not a random occurrence. It was a deliberate, carefully executed strategy. Humans had waited, planned, and prepared for centuries. Their sudden appearance was not spontaneous, it was the culmination of generations of discipline, study, and strategy. And now, the galaxy could see the results. Humans were back, and they were ready to assert their place among the stars once more. By the time the Council and other civilizations fully understood the scope of humanity's return, the galaxy had shifted. The stories of old were no longer myths. The legends had been real, and the humans had evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined. Every civilization, fleet, and colony now had to confront the undeniable truth. Humans were back, they were powerful, and they were not to be underestimated. The truth about humanity's return spread across the stars. Fleet commanders, scholars, and civilians alike shared the same realization. The humans were alive, disciplined, and fully aware of their history and capabilities. Their presence was no longer a curiosity or a myth, it was reality. Every movement, every decision, and every ship that moved through the void reinforced the same lesson. Humans had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again. In every observation post across every colony, the same thought settled in minds and hearts. Humans had returned. They were not merely survivors, they were a force unlike any other, disciplined, intelligent, and fully capable of asserting their presence. The legends, The galaxy had changed. The first encounters with humans, the careful displays of power, and the revelations about their history had left every civilization uneasy. Fleets had retreated, colonies had fortified, and council chambers were filled with debate and concern. But humans were not waiting for permission, and they were not here to negotiate for recognition. They were here to remind the stars that they had always existed, that they were capable, and that they were ready to shape the future. For the humans, the return had been long planned. Every fleet movement, every tactical deployment, every maneuver in space had been executed with precision. They had prepared for centuries, knowing that the galaxy might not welcome them immediately. Yet their patience had a purpose, to ensure that when the moment came, the galaxy would see them as they truly were. Not myths, not legends, but real, disciplined, and powerful beings. The first major demonstration of human capability occurred near a contested sector of space. It was an area that several civilizations had claimed, rich with resources and strategic value. Fleets from 3 different species had gathered, expecting to assert control. They were surprised when human ships appeared, silent, fast, and organized. No signals, no messages, only presence. Their formation alone sent a clear message. Humans were aware and humans were in control. Attempts at communication came immediately. Council fleets transmitted warnings, diplomats sent messages filled with caution, and engineers tried to understand what they were seeing. But humans did not respond in the way anyone expected. They did not negotiate, they did not argue, and they did not plead. Instead, they acted with calm authority, demonstrating capabilities that left the observers stunned. Ships moved with precision, systems were deployed with purpose, and every movement reinforced a single undeniable fact. Humans had returned, and they were fully capable of defending themselves. It became evident that humans were not here to conquer indiscriminately. They did not attack colonies without reason, nor did they destroy fleets unnecessarily. Their approach was strategic and disciplined. Every action was calculated, every deployment measured, and every strike executed with precision. The galaxy began to understand that humans were not reckless despite the myths of old. They were intelligent, organized, and aware of the consequences of every decision. On the observation stations, analysts worked tirelessly to record and interpret every detail. They watched ships move through asteroid fields, evade attacks, and deploy weapons with efficiency that no one could have imagined. Humans combined technology with strategy, experience with discipline, and intelligence with instinct. Every observer realized the same thing. Humans were not just powerful, they were unmatched in foresight, coordination, and execution. As news of these demonstrations spread, fear and respect grew in equal measure. Colonies that had once dismissed tales of humans as myths now scrambled to prepare for potential encounters. Fleets reinforced borders, trade routes were secured, and advisors debated how to respond. Some civilizations attempted diplomacy, hoping to establish contact before conflict could arise. Others opted for caution, choosing to retreat from sectors near human activity. But all understood one undeniable truth. Humans were a force unlike any other, and ignoring them was no longer an option. Humans themselves continued their movements with calm efficiency. Crews worked silently, following orders, maintaining ships, and executing maneuvers that had been planned for generations. There was no chaos, no panic, no unnecessary aggression. Every action had a purpose, and every decision reinforced the presence of humans as a disciplined, capable force. They were not showing off, nor were they seeking glory. They were demonstrating what humanity had always been capable of, and what they had become after centuries of preparation. The Council of Civilizations, after much debate, sent a high-level delegation to attempt formal communication. Humans received them with quiet composure. There was no hostility, but there was no unnecessary friendliness either. Every word, every gesture, every movement was deliberate. The humans did not rush, and they did not hesitate. They had returned not to negotiate for recognition. They had returned to remind the galaxy of their existence and to establish the simple, undeniable truth. Humans were here, and humans were aware of their power. Historians studying the events noted how remarkable it was that a species thought extinct had not only survived, but evolved beyond all expectations. They had mastered their technology, refined their strategies, and maintained discipline that no other species could match. They had not sought revenge for past conflicts, nor had they attacked blindly. Their actions were calculated, focused, and intelligent, demonstrating both strength and restraint. Legends had underestimated them, but reality could not. Humans had returned, and they were unstoppable in their purpose. Colonists across the galaxy watched the demonstrations with awe and fear. Children whispered about the stories they had heard in classrooms or from elders, imagining humans as powerful beings returning from myth. Adults debated trade, security, and alliances, realizing that humans were no longer just a story. They were a reality that demanded attention. Every fleet commander, every diplomat, every civilian understood the same thing. Humans had returned to reshape the galaxy, and there was no ignoring their presence. The humans began to establish a visible presence in key sectors. Stations were repaired, supply lines were secured, and ships were positioned strategically. But they did not claim territory aggressively. Their approach was careful, measured, and deliberate. They wanted the galaxy to recognize their capability, understand their discipline, and respect their awareness. Every action was a lesson in control, precision, and power. Humans had returned, and they were redefining what it meant to exist among the stars. One of the most remarkable aspects of their return was how calm and composed the humans remained. While fleets scrambled, colonies panicked, and councils debated endlessly, human crews continued their work without distraction. There was no fear, no uncertainty, and no hesitation. Every task was performed with exactness. Every maneuver had purpose. Every communication carried authority. Observers noted that humans operated as if the galaxy's fear and confusion were secondary to their mission, not obstacles. The legends of old, stories of humans as reckless, emotional, and dangerous, began to be understood differently. Humans were indeed powerful, but their strength was rooted in intelligence, discipline, and foresight. They were capable of great destruction, yes, but they also demonstrated remarkable restraint. Every fleet encounter, every strategic move, every deployment of ships showed a species fully aware of its own power and the potential consequences of action. They had returned not just to exist, but to teach the galaxy what humanity could truly accomplish. As weeks passed, the presence of humans became undeniable. Fleets could no longer patrol freely without encountering human ships. Trade routes had to be adjusted to avoid confrontation. Colonies strengthened defenses not out of fear, but out of respect for a species that had proven itself in both history and action. The galaxy was learning a vital lesson. Humans were not myths. They were not legends, they were reality, disciplined, powerful, and fully capable of shaping events across the stars. Humans moved strategically through space, avoiding unnecessary conflict but demonstrating readiness at every opportunity. Their ships glided through asteroid fields, deployed defensive measures, and executed maneuvers with an efficiency that left observers in awe. It was not just technology. It was skill, intelligence, and instinct combined in a way that no other species had ever demonstrated. Every action reinforced the lesson that humans had returned not as stories but as real, capable beings who could command respect through discipline and precision. Even the most skeptical civilizations began to acknowledge the truth. Fleet commanders adjusted strategies, scholars revised histories, and council members debated new policies to account for humans' presence. Every observation confirmed the same fact. Humans were alive, disciplined, and prepared for anything the galaxy could throw at them. The legends of old had underestimated them. Reality had revealed the truth. Humans were back, and the universe would never be the same. Finally, after months of controlled demonstrations, strategic movements, and careful observation, humans made their presence undeniable. They held positions near key sectors, established stations for observation and defense, and communicated directly with councils and fleets when necessary. Their return was no longer a mystery or a rumor, it was reality. Every civilization, every fleet, every colony knew that humans had returned, that they were powerful, and that they were fully aware of their own capabilities. The galaxy had been reminded of the lessons of history. Humans were not myths. They were not gone. They had returned disciplined, prepared, and unstoppable in purpose. The legends had been true, but the reality was far greater than anyone had imagined. Every civilization understood the same undeniable truth. Humans were here, and the story of the stars would never be the same again. With their presence established and their message clear, humans began a new era among the stars. They had returned to remind the galaxy of their existence, their strength, and their discipline. Every fleet movement, every strategic decision, and every communication reinforced